Hundreds of protesters have barricaded themselves inside the university campus to prevent police from getting in. Officers surrounded the campus and moved in, ordering people to leave the area. Clashes erupted when riot police broke through one of the entrances. Demonstrators responded with Molotov cocktails. By daybreak, protesters had retained control of most of the campus, but some say the clashes have taken a toll.
We're exhausted because we've been up since 5 a.m. on Sunday. We're desperate. Our supplies are running low.
Police have declared the campus a riot scene, warning that anyone caught in the area will be arrested. University management says it's trying to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control.
We have now received the assurance of police of a temporary suspension of the use of force under the condition that if the protesters do not initiate the use of force, the police will not initiate the use of force.
The nearly 6 months of unrest has plunged the international financial hub into recession, frightening off tourists. In September, Hong Kong airport traffic was down 14% to around 4.85 million compared to the same month last year. Several Asian airlines have cut flights to Hong Kong, including India's SpiceJet and Malaysia's Air Asia. The nearly 6 months of unrest has plunged the international financial hub into recession, frightening off tourists. What started off as a series of mostly peaceful demonstrations against a now-shelved bill to allow extradition to Chinese mainland has morphed into wider calls for democracy and an inquiry into allegations of police brutality. On Saturday, soldiers from the Chinese People's Liberation Army briefly left their Hong Kong barracks to help clean up the streets. It was a rare and symbolic operation, as the troops are usually confined to the barracks and are only called in on emergencies. Philip Owira, TRT World.
We got more from Caroline Malone in Hong Kong.
Well, Hong Kong is in one of the worst phases of violence seen in the 5 months of unrest. Over the weekend, people at one of the main universities threw petrol bombs and set fire to a police vehicle, as well as shooting an officer with an arrow. And demonstrators were repeatedly hounded in response with tear gas, while protesters who'd barricaded themselves inside say the police actually attacked them with rubber bullets and sponge rounds. Hundreds of people have been arrested in the last few days alone, and hundreds more have been taken to hospital. Now, this escalation in violence is all contributing to how people are seeing Hong Kong, with tourists cancelling bookings en masse. Several Asian airlines have also cut flights to Hong Kong, with an aviation publication showing that routes from places like India, Malaysia, South Korea and the Philippines are affected. The airport authority says passenger numbers dropped for another month, 13% in October. Well, the Hong Kong airport is usually one of the busiest in the world, so we're really talking about hundreds of thousands of passengers less every month. Meanwhile, a coalition of 70 airlines had hoped for some sort of financial relief from the government or the airport authority, such as through lower landing fees or rentals, but nothing on that has yet been announced. All of this, of course, is adding with the uncertainty over the US-China trade war and hitting the economy hard. On Friday, the government said Hong Kong's GDP numbers had contracted 3.2% in July to September from the previous quarter. That means the region has officially sunk into a recession for the first time in a decade. And as the finance chief has put it, if things don't improve significantly in the next quarter, Hong Kong is at risk of being in the worst recession since the 1997 handover.
Now on the situation in Hong Kong, Phar Kim Beng is a political analyst and the founder of the chairman of consulting firm Echo Strategic Insight. He joins us from London. Thank you for joining us on the program. Several airlines, primarily Asian airlines, have cut services to Hong Kong amid all these protests. How much of an impact could we see these latest flight cuts have on Hong Kong's economy, which, as we know, is in its first recession in a decade?
Over the last 24 weeks, some $8 billion have been withdrawn from the stock market in Hong Kong. So if this trend or the demonstration continues unstopped, I'm very sure that Hong Kong will spiral into a deeper recessionary economy.
So what's behind these flight cuts? Is it the dropping demand, fewer people wanting to go to Hong Kong because of the protests, or is it safety concerns or something else?
Well, we have to look at it in a global context. It's not just Hong Kong having demonstrations alone. You have places like Santiago and occasionally even Moscow having protests and demonstrations. But the one that has been impacted the most is definitely Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, as we know, is one of the most well-visited cities in the world. So if the flights are being cut down, it's obviously due to the fact that a lot of people do not feel safe enough to travel all the way to Hong Kong, and maybe they prefer to conduct their business online or perhaps even not conduct their business at all, even though Alibaba, which is one of the largest firms in China, has decided to launch their IPO in the Hong Kong stock market this week.
Fewer flights means fewer tourists. As we know, Hong Kong International Airport is one of the busiest airports in the world. How much does Hong Kong depend on tourism, and how much of its tourist industry do you think has been damaged by the protests over these last 5+ months?
Well, the retail and the shopping sector, including the hotels, have been badly affected. 80% of Hong Kong tourists are actually from mainland China, and if mainland Chinese are not very safe, if they don't feel safe enough to come to Hong Kong, then obviously we are looking at a situation where the tourism sector in Hong Kong will be deeply and structurally affected throughout the whole supply chain.
Yeah, speaking of tourists from mainland China, one of the busiest international routes in the world is the flight from Shanghai Pudong to Hong Kong. How much will these cuts impact not just Hong Kong, but the cities that the flights are originating from, and also the airlines themselves?
Well, Cathay Pacific has not been doing well over the last few years. In fact, the irony is that some of the staff members of Cathay Pacific have even participated in the demonstrations at the very airport in which they work, if not the ground staffs of the Hong Kong International Airport. So the groundswell feeling of unhappiness against what they perceive to be a very heavy-handed approach from China, it's very pervasive throughout the city. And that definitely has a negative impact on the consumer sentiment, as well as the sentiment of the people who might want to visit or spend their time in Hong Kong.
All right, we'll leave it there. Phar Kim Beng joining us live from London. Thank you.